The storm had been relentless as I approached the gates of Riverside Asylum. The wind howled through the twisted branches of the trees that lined the perimeter, as if nature itself was trying to keep me away from the abandoned building. But I was determined. I had heard the rumors, stories of strange occurrences, whispers of the haunted halls, and the tragedy of a nurse who had disappeared without a trace. A nurse who had been murdered, or so the rumors suggested, somewhere deep within the asylum's decaying walls. The locals called it the haunting of Riverside, and I, Alex, a young journalist hungry for the truth, was going to uncover it. I had spent days researching the asylum's history, reading about the horrific treatments, the unexplained deaths, and the eventual abandonment of the place after the scandal that surrounded it. But what intrigued me the most was the case of the nurse, the woman who had vanished from the hospital's derelict wing. The last person to be seen before the asylum was locked up for good. They said she had been too kind, too gentle, and that was why she met a tragic end. Or at least, that was the official story. But something didn't sit right with me. Something told me there was more to it. The old, rusted gates creaked as I pushed them open, and I stepped into the asylum's overgrown courtyard. I had a camera in my bag, a flashlight in my hand, and an overwhelming sense of dread claw at my insides. But I shoved it down. I couldn't back out now. This was my chance to make a name for myself, to uncover the truth behind Riverside Asylum. As I entered the building, the air was thick with dust and decay. The walls, once white, were now stained with mildew and age. The floor creaked beneath my feet as I walked down the long, narrow corridor. The silence in the place was oppressive, almost suffocating, broken only by the occasional drip of water somewhere in the distance. It felt like the asylum itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, waiting for me. I wasn't sure why, but I found myself drawn toward the heart of the building, the main hall. I remembered reading about a particular wing, the one where the nurse had disappeared. It had been sealed off after her disappearance. But some said the key was still hidden somewhere in the building, and others whispered about strange noises emanating from that area late at night. That was where I needed to go. The tapping sound started when I reached the center of the hall. It was faint at first, almost like a distant echo, but as I took another step forward, the sound grew louder. Tap, tap, tap. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like footsteps following me. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing behind me. But there was no one, just the shadows of the crumbling asylum stretching out, eerie and foreboding. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog in my mind. It must be the wind, or my nerves getting the best of me. I pushed on, determined to find the truth. And then I saw it. A door at the end of the hallway, old and rusted, with a nameplate still attached. The nurse's name. I didn't know what I expected to find behind it, but my curiosity was overwhelming. With a deep breath, I reached for the handle and turned. The door creaked open, and a cold draft rushed out, biting into my skin. Inside, the room was pitch black, save for a narrow staircase that led down into the basement. The air smelled of rot and mildew, and the temperature seemed to drop by degrees as I descended. The tapping sound was louder now, more insistent, like it was coming from deep within the basement itself. I reached the bottom of the stairs and flicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. The basement was vast, filled with forgotten medical equipment, rusted cages, and discarded furniture. But it wasn't the decay that made my blood run cold. It was a figure I saw standing in the far corner. A woman, pale, gaunt, her hair matted with dirt, and her eyes dark, hollow, and filled with an emptiness that seemed to reach into my soul. She was standing still, staring at me, her bony fingers twitching slightly. I took a step back, my throat dry, but my feet wouldn't move. I couldn't look away. She reached out, and I felt an icy chill flood my body. "Help me?" Her voice was a whisper, barely audible over the pounding of my heart in my ears. It was like a warning, a plea, but there was malice in it too, something unnatural. And then the flashlight flickered. My breath caught in my throat as the light sputtered and went out completely. I was plunged into darkness. The only sound was a rustling of chains, faint and distant, but growing louder with each passing second. My skin prickled. the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end as I stumbled forward, trying to find any way out. I could hear the soft scrape of metal against stone, a sound that seemed to come from every direction at once. I tried to turn back, but the basement seemed to twist and change around me. The walls were shifting, warping, and the air grew heavier, pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. I felt a cold hand brush against my ankle, sending a shock of terror through me. I twisted, trying to pull my foot away, but something was holding me down. Then I was on the ground. I looked up, and there she was again, the nurse, her twisted, decayed smile stretched impossibly wide, her skeletal fingers gripping my ankle, pulling me closer to her. I could see the deep gashes in her skin, the rotting flesh that clung to her bones. She whispered again, this time louder, her voice jagged and full of rage. "You shouldn't have come." I couldn't scream. My mouth was dry, my body frozen in place. The darkness closing around me, and the world seemed to spin. The last thing I saw was her face, inches from mine, her hollow eyes boring into my soul. And then, nothing. Silence. The next morning, the authorities arrived at Riverside Asylum. The gates were locked, bolted, as if no one had ever entered. There was no sign of me, no trace, no clue as to what had happened. My camera was found, left behind at the entrance. It was damaged, but when they reviewed the footage, there was one final image, a blurry, ghostly figure. The nurse, her outstretched hand nearly touching the lens, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. And then nothing. The case remains unsolved. But the townsfolk still speak of it, and sometimes, late at night when the wind howls through the trees, they claim they can hear my screams echoing from the depths of Riverside Asylum. 3 months ago, I inherited an old building from my late uncle, a former psychiatrist. It was a forgotten asylum on the outskirts of town, St. Croft Asylum, a relic from a time long past. Its history riddled with rumors of patients left to die in dark experiments conducted in its decrepit halls. The place was in disrepair, but with my background in architecture, I thought I could fix it up. I should have known better. Looking back, I wonder if I was simply drawn to it by some twisted curiosity, some need to understand the things that went on inside that place, or if it was fate pulling me towards something far worse than I could ever have imagined. The first time I saw the asylum, I could barely believe it was real. The building sat isolated on a hill, its towering stone structure overgrown with ivy and moss. The windows, dark and cracked, gave off an unsettling sense of abandonment. My uncle's estate lawyer had said it was in need of significant repairs, but he didn't mention the strange, pull-eyed feel when I stepped onto property or the way the air seemed to thicken around me, as though the building itself were alive, waiting for something or someone. When I finally entered, it was as if the asylum had been frozen in time. Dust clung to everything, the floors, the walls, the air itself. The faint, musty smell of mildew mixed with something else I couldn't place. There was no sound, no movement, just the oppressive weight of silence. I walked through the halls with a sense of awe, but also unease, as if the place was watching me, waiting for me to disturb its long-forgotten secrets. The faded paint on the walls peeled in some places, revealing crumbling brick beneath. Broken furniture sat in the corners, abandoned for decades. The east wing, the part of the building where the most disturbing rumors swirled, drew me in. As I explored, the air grew colder, and my breath began to fog in the dim light. It was there in a dust-covered room that I found the diary. At first, I thought it was just another abandoned item, a relic of the past. But as I opened it, I realized it belonged to someone named Lena. The handwriting was frantic, almost illegible in places, but the words were clear enough. The doctor, she could never leave the asylum. The entries grew more erratic as the pages turned, filled with ramblings about strange experiments and the doctor's eyes that never blinked. I couldn't put the diary down. Each entry felt like a desperate plea for help, as though Lena had known something terrible was happening in this place and could do nothing to stop it. The pages described the doctor's experiments, which ranged from bizarre treatments to outright torture, all under the guise of medical care. There was mention of other patients who seemed to disappear into the walls, into the shadows, never to be seen again. The journal didn't just recount the past. It seemed to predict something terrible that had yet to come. As I finished reading, I felt a shiver run down my spine, a sense of dread creeping over me that I couldn't shake. Something wasn't right. This place wasn't abandoned at all. It was haunted, not just by the ghosts of the past, but by something far darker, something still lingering within the crumbling walls. That night, I sat in the kitchen, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The building was still and quiet, the kind of silence that presses in on you like a physical weight. I tried to dismiss the creeping anxiety, telling myself it was just my imagination. But then I heard it, a faint scraping sound coming from the halls. It was too rhythmic to be the building settling, too deliberate. My heart skipped a beat. I crept to the window and peered out into the darkness, my eyes searching for any sign of movement. And there it was. A figure stood by the entrance of the east wing, motionless. It was tall, its shape vaguely human, but something about it felt off. The silhouette was too still, too unnatural. I should have gone inside, locked the doors, and called the police. But I didn't. I couldn't. I stood there, frozen, staring back at the figure until it finally disappeared into the shadows. The next day, I was determined to investigate. I knew something wasn't right, but I couldn't resist. I had to see for myself what was behind that locked door in the east wing, the door that had always been sealed shut. When I returned, it was wide open. The air in the hallway seemed to pulse with a strange energy, and I stepped inside, heart racing. The room was filled with old medical files, dusty and yellow with age, yet some of them were dated long after the asylum had supposedly closed. How was that possible? I couldn't stop myself. I thumbed through the files, each one more disturbing than the last. There were names I recognized from the diary. Patients who had been experimented on, tortured, driven to madness. There were records of surgeries, treatments that shouldn't have been possible, and notes from the doctor himself, his handwriting meticulous and cold. The last file I found sent a chill through my bones. It was Lena's file, but there were no notes about her treatment or her release, just a single chilling sentence. Lena's death was a necessary sacrifice. I turned to leave, but then I saw it, a shadow, fleeting and dark, darting down the hallway. It was too fast, too fluid to be human. My breath caught in my throat as I instinctively followed it, my feet moving faster than my mind could comprehend. I turned the corner, but there was nothing there, no one, just the empty, decaying hallways stretching endlessly before me. I couldn't explain what I had just seen or what had happened, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't alone in that place. That night, I went to bed early, hoping to shake off the dread that had settled in my chest. I was just starting to drift off when I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from a hall outside my door. My heart pounded in my chest. I lay there, frozen, too terrified to move. The footsteps grew closer, closer, until they stopped right outside my door. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. And then the door creaked open. There, standing in the doorway, was the figure. The same one I had seen the night before, motionless, shrouded in shadow. It was a woman, but her face was obscured by a veil of darkness. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there, staring at me with eyes that I couldn't see, but felt deep within my soul. I screamed and ran. I didn't care that it was the middle of the night. I didn't care that I was in an old, abandoned asylum. I ran, and I didn't stop until I reached the front door. I threw it open, the cold night air hitting me like a slap, but when I turned to look back, the figure was gone. I never returned to St. Croft. The next day, I called a demolition crew, instructing them to tear the place down. I wasn't sure if I had imagined everything, or if the asylum was still haunted by the ghosts of its past. But one thing was clear. I would never return, never step foot in that place again. Not for my uncle, not for the building, and certainly not for Lena or the doctor. The rumors were true. The asylum was never really abandoned. The spirits of the patients still roamed those halls, waiting for someone foolish enough to uncover their darkest secrets. And me? I left. I was done. But even now, in the dead of night, I still hear it. The faint scraping sound, the whispers, the footsteps. They follow me, and no matter where I go, I know I'll never truly escape the derelict wings of St. Croft Asylum.